Hi, good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name's Steve Moore, and I'm the founder of the ACI, and it's my pleasure to invite you to today's webinar. I'll just give a short introduction and set the context for the content of this webinar, and then I'll hand over to our moderator, Roisin, who will introduce you to our distinguished panel of experts, and we'll open up the conversation. And Roisin will take you through the process around how you introduce the panelists themselves, but also allow you to contribute to the debate that takes place. So what's the context for today? The context really is, the story of this really starts in January 2019, when the European Commission designated CBD as a novel food. At that stage, the UK was still a member of the European Union, and there was considerable interest and some conjecture around how this process would work in the UK post-Brexit. Throughout that year, I, as the founder of the CMC, the Centre for Medicinal Cannabis, had members of mine, plus new organisations from across the world, coming to me looking for some hand-holding to take them through this process. And as some of you who are guests at this webinar and some of you who are contributing to the webinar as panelists will know, is there was a series of meetings throughout 2019 where we were trying to get the FSA to commit to what they describe as a proportionate implementation of this novel foods process. And we launched the ACI in November of that year, still having not got those reassurances, but in February 2020, just before the first COVID lockdown, we actually got a commitment from the FSA to implement the novel foods process. And all the companies who are operating in this product category were told that they can only stay in the market provided they committed to completing a dossier and having it submitted to the FSA by the 31st of March 2021. And that process has been long. It's become something of an ordeal over the last few years, but but alongside that was another issue which got less attention, but was something that we've been focusing in on since the middle of 2019, and that was the issue about the legal framework. So what this industry really was crying out for was both the regulatory path and the legal framework. The FSA were kind of motivated because of the European Commission designation to implement the UK approach to that. The Home Office were somewhat recalcitrant regarding that, and they continued to sort of question whether whether the current legal framework that existed was sufficient. But the main breakthrough came in January 2021, when the then Minister of State, Kit Malthouse, issued a ministerial commission letter to the ACMD asking for recommendations regarding creating a legal framework, advice around creating a legal framework for CBD in the UK. And the principal questions he was asking of the ACMD were what dose cannabinoids, what dose and which cannabinoids have no detectable psychoactive effect on humans, and whether CBD products were liable to be abused or have ill effects, and whether the controlled substances could in practice be recovered from such products. And that initiated a year-long consultation process. And the ACI played a very full part in that. In September that year, we produced a peer-reviewed report from our scientific team, which was submitted to the ACMD. We spent a significant amount of time with the ACMD as part of their deliberations. And then finally, in December of 2021, the ACMD made a series of recommendations to the Home Office regarding how they should approach this. Now, since then, as ACI members will be aware, we have been in constant contact with the Home Office, asking them at what point they were going to respond to these ACMD recommendations and the implied intent to make amendments to the Misuse of Drugs Act to allow these products to continue to be sold legally in the UK. And that's been a slow process, which only accelerated really this summer after the license of Jersey Hemp, one of our members, was revoked. They operated and exported products from the island of Jersey to the United Kingdom under a license, under memorandum of understanding signed between the government of Jersey and the Home Office. And that license was revoked in June, some months after the FSA dossier that they had submitted had been validated by the Food Standards Agency risk assessors. So that was the moment of sort of reckoning for the industry, because at that point, the issue about the salience of this issue suddenly became very apparent, because what we've been saying to the Home Office throughout this process, and indeed what we've been saying to the FSA throughout this process, was the safety assessment process cannot progress unless there's a clear legal framework for these products. So to be fair, the policy people inside the Home Office have acted on that. I mean, they accepted the fact that there is an issue that has now got to be addressed. So we have started a series. We launched a campaign at the end of August, early September, to kind of draw attention to this issue. So we've got significant amount of media coverage, we've significant amount of political engagement, and importantly, we've had a very constructive dialogue with the key officials within the Home Office. And it's clear from those conversations, which have intensified over the last month, that their intent is to address this issue very imminently. In fact, we had a meeting last Friday which suggested that could happen as soon as early next month. So the intention of the Home Office, subject to ministerial approval as ever, is to formally respond to the ACMD recommendations of December 2021 and to make necessary amendments to the Misuse of Drugs Act, which could happen anytime thereafter. So the purpose of this webinar today is not to reopen that debate, the debate that was initiated in 2021 about what is a safe level of controlled substances in the CBD products, but instead to look at the opportunities that this potential change, and now seemingly imminent change, will have on this sector. So the questions I'll be interested to get answers to today is, what impact is going to have on the regulatory process, and how are companies going to be able to demonstrate compliance with the new requirements? What impact is going to have on investment in this, given the fact that this shouldn't go some way towards de-risking this product category for investors in a way it hasn't been previously? And thirdly, what's it mean for the future of the product category, in particularly in relation to where is the innovation going to take place within the sector? Now, there's been road for anybody who's worked in the sector, they'll be aware that in the absence of a legal framework, all of these things have been impediments to progress and have had a big impact on everybody operating in the sector, whether they're trying to raise money, whether they're trying to innovate, whether they're trying to seek regulatory approval, and so on. So we think this is probably the best thing that could happen, and the biggest boost that could happen to the sector going forward. And we've called this webinar at short notice, the insights from people leading this business in the United Kingdom, lawyers, investors, and others, just to get some time to begin to have a conversation on what this means going forward. So to say, I don't want to have a long conversation about the likely decision that the Home Office take. That's now in their hands, and they've probably taken it already. But instead, to look at the potential benefits and impact on the wider industry. So, thank you again for your time today. Really looking forward to the next hour and the conversations. And with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to Roisin. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Steve. So before we get started, just to let you know, there is a Q&A box where we will be looking for questions from our audience this afternoon. If you would be kind enough to drop your questions for any of our speakers in the Q&A box, we will get around to answering as many of those as possible in the second half of this session. But to get started, I would like to introduce our speakers first and foremost. So we have from NatureCan, Andy Duckworth, who is NatureCan co-founder and CEO. We also have Sarah Gaunt, who is our regulatory associate at GRS. We have Alex Brooks, managing director of Canaccord Genuity, the global capital markets firm. We also have Nick Davis, senior partner at Memory Crystal. And we have Alex Andros from ChemID, which is one of the largest decentralized chemical data management platforms for regulated goods in the world, joining us from Austin, Texas this afternoon. So thank you to all of our speakers for making the time to join this webinar today. Andy, if I could start with you, please. As the CEO of one of the companies with, I would say, one of the broadest kind of product portfolios that we see in the market space, can you just tell us a little bit about what it's like doing business in the UK today versus, some of the other markets that NatureCan is operating in?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess we get like a really good picture of all the different markets because we're in, whether it's Western Europe, Asia, the US, etc. And yeah, so we get a really nice cross section of the challenges in each market, and there is like regulatory challenges in each market. The UK, I'd say the limiting factor for NatureCan at the minute has been more the novel food list and the FSA sort of situation, which was there, when we entered into it. So there's no complaints, and at NatureCan we've got a really strong set of products, but we try and stick to the rules. So in the UK, if you weren't on the market before Feb 20, we don't sell those products. And these products that we've got that we sell in other markets clearly, that are successful products that we can't sell in the UK. So from that perspective, that's probably like our limiting factor. In terms of the actual market itself, when we get more and more clarity across all the different regulatory bodies, which seems to be coming, which is really positive, then I guess that would mean more investment from us, as a business into the UK. Because at the minute, I'd say 98% of our sales are outside the UK, which is obviously quite probably non-typical for a UK business. And, it's probably not where we choose to put our marketing costs. I guess various elements of headcount, we don't put into the UK at the minute because you're not going to get the return that maybe you would need, for a viable business. But again, none of this is a complaint. It's more, shaped the globalization strategy, that we tried to implement at NatureCan, which I think we would have gone with anyway, but they would be, I guess, the immediate, thoughts to the question.
Yeah. So just talk me through from a business kind of operational point of view. What have been some of the implications? Like, is it, payments? Is it new product development? Like, what are some of the kind of areas that you've felt you've kind of maybe been held back on in the UK because of the kind of grey area, as we call it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess it's, right from the very start, whether it's getting a tax number, then setting a bank up, a bank account and all that sort of good stuff. Payment gateways generally, are always a massive challenge, within CBD and cannabinoids. And I'm sure there's plenty of people on this call who've been through the constant downloading your bank statement and all that sort of good stuff, to get a new payment gateway. But it definitely stretches, far beyond that as well. I'll talk about MPD and new product development in a minute, but also importing your products or your distillates and all that sort of good stuff. You've got various rules to hit again. So you're trying to do right with Border Force and do right with the Food Standards Agency. And I guess, as a CEO, the less moving the target is, the better. So again, where possibly we're about to get to, does help. But, there would always be an argument that people would say, which I do buy, is that, the rules, when you get in there, stick to the rules. And that's something we try and do. In terms of MPD, I sort of brushed upon it, but, this might not fix the MPD challenge that we face because of, the FSA's current position, which we understand, where actually you need to be on the market before Feb 20. And then also possibly to enter, as a novel food, you might need 3 years stability, toxicology. So I don't think that, gets fixed sort of quickly. But yeah, we've seen challenges, in every aspect of setting up a business and running the business. But, high barriers to entry, probably high reward at the end, I guess.
So what would a kind of comprehensive legal framework for CBD in the UK kind of mean to a company like NatureCan? What would happen? Obviously, there's the overnight implications and there's the kind of long-term, long game implications. So what would a positive change like that mean to NatureCan?
Yeah, I think, as you grow in business, you're always looking for funding. I think at the minute, most CBD and possibly medcam type businesses, you're looking for high net worths and angels. And I guess, once you've got a more stable framework that everyone understands, private equity, comes in and becomes more relevant. Because I do think that if you want to, DD, in terms of regulatory, any cannabinoid business, you will find challenges, underneath the bonnet. So I think that, comes down the line if your private equity becoming more interested in the sector. So that would be, my sort of major sort of thought behind, what this might be.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy. Sarah, if I can come to you next and just kind of obviously great to get a picture of kind of where, a CEO is looking at. And also from your side of the coin and the regulatory side and the lab testing and all of that kind of stuff, do you want to just kind of sum up for us the current state of play for lab testing and CBD products in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way we've been working so far and all the novel foods applications that have been in so far, we've been measuring, everybody's been interpreting, I think, the regulations determining the contaminants such as THC in their own way. And therefore, everyone has measured that using the available labs in their own way. So having an actual limit that you've got to hit makes life a lot clearer. It means that you can actually, you know what, we know that we've got to hit this level within a product. The ambiguity that I can see, certainly with the ACMD recommendations, is the fact that they're trying to base a limit on serving size, which could cause some issues in terms of what is your serving size? Manufacturers changing their serving size to make sure that you hit those THC levels, but also in the fact that a lot of people have already submitted data based on THC levels per 100 grams percentage. So there will be some recalculations that will probably be needed for the novel foods process, but it's hopefully going to be another step to unlocking that novel foods process and making it move a little bit faster, which I think will get rid of some of the ambiguity. I guess in terms of labs, one of the things we've certainly found when we're working with external labs, and I'm not a lab expert, I think Alex will talk a bit more about the analytical testing later, is that actually you can take one product to 3 different labs and get 3 different results on THC. You can test the same product in the same lab and get different results. So, and I think the ACMD recognized this and did suggest doing more ring trials, standardizing the protocols for sample preparation. That is going to be a hurdle in implementing this, whatever limits come out of the Home Office. It's going to be that implementation is going to still be tricky, and making sure that the labs are of sufficient standard and testing is good enough and robust enough, especially when we're getting down to quite low levels. I think that is going to prove interesting.
Okay, thank you. If I could bring in Alex Brooks, if you could just talk to us a little bit about kind of what's been happening from, I guess, the capital and investment side of things in this space so far, and what a framework as the proposed ACD recommendations would actually change. You know, since the industry has been born, CBD has always been deemed high risk. There's the words that we always hear. So what would rescheduling CBD in the UK do to change that, if anything?
I think the very short answer as to what's been happening is not much for quite a while. And the reason for that is really that it's the single biggest risk that any investment intermediary is going to have is either they end up with a product they can't sell, or they end up with a mis-selling issue, or they end up with, in the particular case of controlled substances, they end up with criminal liability, including of anybody in the sort of in the ownership chain. And one of the big challenges in cannabis as a sector has been that it's been very difficult to get round the potential criminal liability and to give real comfort. And that has very heavily restricted public capital markets, stock exchanges, which is what I really focus on. Clearly, there is one significant success story, which is Celadon Pharmaceuticals, which has successfully did a reverse takeover 18 months ago, and is now has a decent track record on the stock exchange. And stock exchanges, like many other investors, tend to do what they did last time. So one successful investment is an important element of it. What these ACMD regulations really bring is that they add a degree of certainty to anybody owning or operating a CBD business, which in turn allows you as a as a potential investor or as a potential intermediary to say, look, this is now a regulated, known substance. This is a regulated, known product. And I know that I'm not going to be subject to arbitrary or unpredictable enforcement action against me, and it really does open up the capital markets for the industry. Now, whether that does anything in the very short term is a big question, because the capital markets are closed to pretty much everybody right now. But that doesn't mean that they will stay closed for very long. And certainly there are the beginnings of some green shoots on my side. So I mean, look, it's a big and important step, and it's one that we're very pleased that's been taken.
Thanks. And Nick, if I could bring you in there as well, obviously, you know, talking about investment in the sector and potential for investment in the sector, you know, from a UK investment kind of picture, you know, are there, you know, investors kind of waiting in the halls, ready to kind of pounce on CBD as a category, or is this more of a long game that we might see pending any kind of green light from a framework point of view?
I think you need to differentiate between investors. Andy mentioned a number of times private equity, who are a group that we can talk about. I, as you know, was able to assist the first listing of a medical cannabis business in the UK, having taken some quite significant action to facilitate that through discussions with the Home Office and the regulators, and which led to a note being published, you know, another set of guidance, the primary markets technical note. And interestingly, you know, that was really quite happy with CBD, and it said, you know, the position in relation to consumer CBD is slightly different, but the risk of criminal conduct is linked to whether CBD contains a controlled substance, and there were no rules from the Home Office as to what that meant. So what that really meant was, whilst they appeared to suggest that CBD was an investable class, it became very quickly apparent, not just on the main market but AIM as well, but even when capital markets, Alex, were in a better position than they are now, investment was being pushed towards medical cannabis because of the framework that was in place, as opposed to CBD, where there was still this uncertainty. When I was asked to give a legal opinion as to what the appropriate levels of THC were in the UK, the answer is 0. Well, we know that that's almost impossible. So I think this will be very welcomed. I don't think there's a wall of capital in the public markets for anything at the moment. However, markets change rapidly, and I think if we can have a legal framework in the CBD space that we can point to, that will be, yeah, alongside novel foods, which we know have their challenges. And you know, Sarah and I and Alex have worked on a number of transactions together around testing and capital markets. On the other side, on the private side, I think it will open up a big opportunity, because CBD is an FMCG, and Andy have spent many an hour discussing this. And at the moment, if you're a private equity firm, you've got other places which are legally more certain to deploy capital. But Andy, in spite of all of this, has built a multi-million-pound business, which in any ordinary circumstances would probably have attracted, private equity, venture capital, whatever that may be, as opposed to having to talk to business angels and private family offices. So I think this can only be good news. It can only be good news for the UK government to actually be seen to be dealing with proceeds of crime. I'd like to see them dealing with it on the medical cannabis side as well. This hopefully is the first step. But certainly, the ability to drive some of the R&D that Andy's not doing in the UK because it's too difficult, and for the international brands and companies that we work with to be able to bring product into the UK, with much clearer guidance, can only be a good thing. We completed a piece of M&A CBD to CBD last week, because those are the only buyers at the moment. One CBD company bought another CBD company's product, whereas normally you'd expect any FMCG business to be talking to Andy and saying, you're growing exponentially, you've got a global business, can we buy Can we invest? What's the story? So it's good news. Let's see. The devil will be in the detail as always. And as Sarah said, if we do take on the limits that have been suggested, how we test it, what the testing is going to look like, how we're going to get people comfortable. But when you look at Trip being sold in major supermarkets across the whole of the country, even though there is this legal uncertainty, that tells you that the market's there. So hopefully this will be good news.
Absolutely. If I could bring in Alex Androids now from ChemID, who's joining us from Texas this afternoon. Alex, I'm very conscious that you've been kind of watching everything unfold in the UK over recent years from afar, and obviously with your expertise in the other kind of businesses that you're involved in as well. So what are your thoughts on kind of what's going on here in the UK and best case scenario, I suppose, for businesses like Andy's?
Well, I have an optimistic view of things in the UK. I personally operate, on a normalized basis with a high degree of speculation as a whole. But in the UK, I feel like the collaboration amongst industry, which I believe is light years ahead of government action, is a positive indicator. And the United Kingdom has an extraordinary opportunity to essentially take collaboration in industry in the form of collective bargaining and implement safeguards that are going to check the boxes for the government regulators when they start really diving into the details. And those check boxes are going to give them assurances to move the industry forward, right? That would include safe banking, decriminalization, and oversight in a regulated market, which this will be. Obviously, it will fall under the guidance of a regulated industry, because the potential for something to go wrong is there, right? And that evidence is in the United States. So if you walk into a dispensary in the United States and you test you test 10 products, 8 of those products won't even have 50% of the potency that's on the label claim. And that could be inflation or deflation of potency results. And that's because they haven't implemented the safeguards, right? They didn't know what to do. So they just basically passed the laws, and then they passed the actual responsibilities to the states to actually figure that out. The United Kingdom doesn't have that same, complicated, tangled web of, different states. The United Kingdom has the ability to sit there and impose regulation, but is looking for guidance from, assorted agencies like the ACMD, and they're listening, to the CMC, they're listening, to ACI. And that's very, very powerful, because ACI and everybody on this call has the unique ability to simply look at what went wrong in every other market and fix that problem. And the majority of those problems can be fixed with collective bargaining. And it could be so understanding what works, what helps a market thrive, but at the same time checks the boxes for consumer safety. And that will give the government assurances. So I think that the amount of communication that's going on amongst the peers, Andy, Nick, Alex sitting on the private equity side, watching things, addressing the issues that are affecting the decision makers of the venture capital guys, the M&A markets. All of those conversations are relevant, because at the end of the day, if you have an industry that doesn't have access to capital, it's always going to be depressed. It's never going to achieve its full potential. But on the flip side, addressing, the lab testing and these 4 requirements, recommendations by the ACMD, obviously the buck is being passed for the responsibility and the guidance. And so if the members of the trade and the industry on all levels inside the United Kingdom are sitting at a table and addressing all of these recommendations, whether they come from the ACMD or any other agency, and you can check those boxes, then things will happen faster. And I see things happening at a much greater speed in the United Kingdom than any other market worldwide. And that to me is very impressive. And that to me, it gives me a lot of optimism that the United Kingdom will get things right for the most part at a very high percentage versus any other market. And it can set the stage for being a global force in the trade, whether the trade is on the more of the merchant side or the distribution side, formulation, manufacturing, et cetera. And all of those create jobs, and all of those jobs create an abundancy of wealth. And so I'm very optimistic about what I see in the United Kingdom. And I know that it appears to be taking longer than normal, but it's actually much shorter. I see a collapsing of time versus what I see in the United States, which is, it's having to unravel things to put them back together. And you don't necessarily have to do that there. So I'm optimistic.
And as well, Alex, while we have you, do you want to tell us a little bit about ChemID and exactly kind of what ChemID facilitates as well, just because it's very valid to this discussion around consumer safety?
Yes. So ChemID is a chemical data management platform. We cut our teeth in decentralized testing as a service. That's where we started 6 years ago. So essentially what that means is we understood that if people were going to be manufacturing goods inside their four walls, that they should be focused, especially any consumable, human consumable, they should be focused on consistency and safety of the product. So if you're going to put a product on the shelf, people need to feel safe about what they want to buy, and that they should feel good about putting that product in their mouth, consuming it, especially if they're looking to address some form of an ailment, whether it's anxiety or arthritis, et cetera. And so what we did was we essentially took the same level of testing that is occurring inside an ISO accredited laboratory, and we replicated that system and simplified some of the processes so that it would be more cost effective for small to medium-sized businesses to bring that testing in-house, so that it would match the level of testing that was required by the government for permitted entities, dispensaries, growers, processors, et cetera. So we replicated that model on a decentralized basis and used data and algorithms to be able to track system health, et cetera, ensure that companies are using, they're constantly calibrating their machines, tracking calibration remotely, being able to provide consulting services remotely by piping in to people's internal R&D testing labs inside their four walls. And so inside that process, we figured out that, we figured out what could go wrong. So how people made mistakes or how, so we essentially logged all, tens of thousands of issues by looking at hundreds of thousands of tests, and started to create rules that you can track using a digital pathway. So we look at all of these ways that things go right and all of these ways that things go wrong, internal testing, from an internal testing perspective, and then created a notification system so that operators can see when things go wrong before they go really wrong. And what that means, when things go really wrong, that's when a product is actually on the shelf and people are ingesting that product. And so what we felt was, okay, if venture capital and private equity and the government doesn't want a product or wants to reduce the risk, mitigate risk from a consumer ingesting a product that is falsely labeled or even worse, contaminated, then they needed to be able to track the product all the way to the point of origin and understand how that product has been tested at every stage of its life cycle, from point of origin to point of sale. So what we've created is a chemical data management platform that tracks all of those processes and then gives people the assurance at the very end of the day that the product has been tested, and that the way that it has been tested matches the way that a lab would test product, and track calibration and all of the details. And that process is extremely useful to essentially check the regulatory checkboxes. So as I look at what the ACMD has issued in the form of recommendations in their framework, our technology actually checks all 4 of those boxes, which is, obviously makes me feel good, and makes me feel good about what we can do together collectively within the UK. And for any of the other issues, there are sufficient technology providers that are out there from an ERP perspective, that essentially can help companies manage the production, manufacturing, going back to cultivation, processing, manufacturing, distribution, and retail for this entire industry. And if you have all of that, then you check all these 4 boxes, then you go back to the FSA and you say, we've checked these 4 boxes collectively as an industry. And eventually what that does, solving these problems, is it reduces the risk for operators, which the operator doesn't want to go to jail, and the operator doesn't want to get sued. The operator doesn't want reputational damage. It improves the capital. That's going to improve the capital market situation. That's going to give assurances to investors that the company isn't going to get sued and put out of business, or they're going to have reputational damage, et cetera. So it's going to check off the directors and officers insurance box. It'll check off, or really give us a tremendous amount of assurances towards product liability, any issues related to product liability. And most importantly, it'll give consumers an assurance that, hey, I'm going to buy this product. It's been tested. And if I like this product and it works for me and I buy it again, I can expect the same thing. And that's the most important thing that a consumer wants to know. And so if you check all of those boxes, then the government has effectively done its job in ensuring that the consumers are safe. And then if that happens, the market thrives. So to us, that's the process.
Okay, thank you for that, Alex. And I want to bring Andy back in, as obviously the co-founder of a CBD business operating in the UK and other markets. I suppose what I'd really like to know from your point of view, Andy, is if a legal framework was introduced overnight, this grey area was kind of forced out, and we had a kind of clear pathway for companies like yours to operate in the UK. What are some of the kind of crucial things that you want to happen, that you would like to see happen?
So really wary of coming up with a wish list. I mean, so some things are broadly related. I guess it's the ability to do marketing. So will the likes of Facebook, Google, in time understand there's now a framework and adapt accordingly? You've always got a lag between any major institution recognizing that something is regulated, and then allowing you to do what you'd like to do as a business. But again, that's not their problem. That's sort of my problem, and definitely don't want to come across as whiny, because it's not the case. But I think generally it's over time. Nick hinted at it, is that I feel as if like 15 million sales in CBD and cannabinoids is probably akin to 50 million sales in other fast-moving consumer goods, with the amount of work you've had to do to get there, and probably the costs you've incurred legally, the challenges you've incurred in simple business, supply chain elements and setup and all that sort of good stuff. So yeah, I mean, all that type of stuff will follow, as it's been hinted at, by all the panelists really, as we get the clarity.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks for that insight. And
actually, Andy, it's really interesting, because it's great if we do get the legal framework and the certainty, but actually how the other stakeholders within the wider industry are going to react to that. And I guess hopefully that will be part of the good work that our friends at the ACI will do, because being able to go to Facebook and other digital marketing and using Sarah and Alex's technology to make sure that we can say, this Nature Can product is now both FSA approved for novel food, and we're legal because we're trading at this level of THC. We've got a change to the Proceeds of Crime Act. Hallelujah, we're all good. The big question that we don't know is how will the wider world react to that, because it's important to the 56 people in the room and the 8 panelists that are talking. How that's digested, Andy, you know better than anyone. There's the lag you talked about. The question is, how long will that lag be? What level of comfort will they want to see? How are we gonna get new certificates that say HOCA compliant, Food Standards Agency compliant? Happy days. Probably yes, I would guess. It's gonna be really interesting to see where this goes once hopefully we get the framework that enables to open bank accounts for clients. We had a client who sent us a payment and they saw Memory Crystal, our firm's name, and bizarrely the person in compliance in the bank thought we might be in the business of crystal meth. I kid you not, and they blocked the payment. No, we're a law firm. We started in 1978 by Mr. Peter Crystal, and it happened to be it was a CBD company and crystal, and the money disappeared into the ether. So it's just going to be this will be a big step, but how it then is adopted by the rest of the world is going to be really interesting.
I would also put caveat on it is a big step, but it's not novel foods approval. It's just making sure that it can progress a little bit further through novel foods.
Yeah.
We've not gone through that risk assessment to evidence it's safe. We're just saying the level of contamination is here. Make sure that your products don't go above them. Whereas at the moment, we don't really know where that level of contamination is.
Yeah.
So it's still a long road.
Put right by the scientist. Shush.
I just wondered if Alex Andrels is there to just comment on something in the chat that you've just answered to one of the questions we've had. Alex, do you want to just explain that to people, just in case they haven't seen it in our webinar chat box?
Yes. So this question has 2 parts. One, I just answered. Do we know the current legislation changes? Do we know what the current legislation changes are, and what that means in terms of mechanism of delivery? That needs some clarification for me to answer. When you say mechanism of delivery, do you mean like are we talking about smokable flower? Are we talking about tinctures? Are we talking about pills, or are we talking about like how product moves from one location to the next location? Is this a logistical issue, or is this a delivery system from ingesting product? So if you could just refine that question, it would help.
Alex, I think the question, it probably matches. It says, what is the suggested proposal limit, and would this upcoming change allow CBD flower to be sold and imported into the UK? So I think they're talking about.
Yeah, there's another question in there too.
Yeah.
So also, is there a system in place to test the robustness of the product? And the answer is yes. The short answer is yes. The testing for cannabis product is in terms of THC and contaminants. THC is not a contaminant. THC is a compound that may be a contaminant, or it may not be a contaminant, depending on which cannabinoid we're referring to. And so, that is a complicated question in itself. In regards to how the ACMD and FSA look at cannabis, and looking at it specifically from a CBD perspective, and even call it even up to 20 different cannabinoids, the testing processes are absolutely known. How do you test this product? What are the processes for testing? These are known. So these are not unknowns as to can a lab accurately assess and identify and quantitate these cannabinoids, from parts per million to parts per billion to even parts per trillion, right? Some of these testing requirements can become so absolutely ridiculous that they hurt everybody in this industry, and they are insignificant in terms of you ingesting them, because your body actually has an endocannabinoid system already. So our body already is familiar with cannabinoids naturally. And so from a scientific perspective, testing is known, right? And that is true. In regards to how the product moves logistically from one location to another, I would say that the solutions are already there, and people in other markets, the United States, for example, they know what works and what does not work. So, and the question then becomes, how do you unravel things and put it back together? And how do you track that testing? How can you track the testing? How do you know that this product here that you bought on a shelf that has a certificate of analysis that you read from a QR code, how do you know that that's really what is inside the box? And that really has to be tied to the labs, and the labs have to be able to be transparent about how they're testing the product, and how they're preparing their samples, right? And that those are all knowns. So then really the information highway, the transparency, once you connect those dots, that addresses the issues there in relation to lab testing. But the answer is they are known from a scientific perspective.
Sarah, I can see you nodding along there. Do you want to come in on that?
I was just going to say, I think I agree with you, Alex, that they are known. One of the issues that we have, certainly in the UK, you may not have this in the States, is that some of the testing houses will not disclose their methodologies because it's their internal IP. So if there was a standardized methodology, I think, to go with this change in limits, it would help the industry in terms of, actually, we just use the standardized methodology, or if everyone adopted it.
I love the way that you said, you put that. I'm going to take it one step further, and I'm going to throw gasoline on that just for 1 second. In the United States, the labs do not disclose their testing and methodologies because they don't want you to question how you prepared a sample, and they don't want to have to defend themselves on how they tested a sample. Because it is very easy, if they do not provide the data to you, it's because they're obfuscating the data. And if they're obfuscating the data, it allows them to open the door to lab shopping, taking one sample and sending it to 3 labs, and then getting the result that you want that benefits you as a company, but does not benefit the consumer. Yeah. And the way that the labs actually produce the result, and the fact that they are not required to give you the information on how you got that result, gives the lab the power to open the door to lab shopping. And that hurts the ultimate consumer.
Yeah, agreed.
I'm just going to bring in Alex Brooks, if I can, for a second, to kind of close us out for the session. And Alex, really on the proceeds of crime stuff that you were talking about earlier, and everything that we've discussed in this session, and what an ideal framework might look like, and the ACMD recommendations that they are, do the recommendations do enough or go far enough in terms of instilling legitimacy and confidence from your point of view?
I think yes, but ultimately it doesn't really matter what my opinion is. It matters whether we can sign off a whole bunch of investors to get behind a transaction. I think the ambition to have a clear definition of what is compliant material, and therefore have a known limit, and therefore that removes the proceeds of crime concern, is a huge step forward, and that really makes a very big difference. So yes, but I eagerly await my first opportunity to test this.
Thank you. Just a question has come in, and I think it might be one for yourself, Sarah. Do you see any similarities with how alcohol is dealt with in the UK? So batch numbers and codes for traceability in the event of emergency, product recalls, etc. anything to say on that? Any comments?
I mean, I think that's not a batch codes and recall should be a part of any food manufacturing. Anybody who's putting a food product, drink product out on the market should have batch codes, should be able to trace all their ingredients. So I'm not sure necessarily that I mean, we're setting a limit in terms of, like you might have with alcohol unit consumption, we're setting a limit of those limits of consumption. I can't quite see the parallels. I think that's just something that you should be doing anyway. And if you're not, you probably ought to be looking at it like that.
Final word to yourself, Andy. Any comments to close us out from your perspective, please?
Just I hope it all gets through and common sense sort of prevails. You know, we respect rules. We want to work to rules, and if you sort of have one target to hit, you know, as business owners, you know, we'll do our best to hit them. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Fantastic. Well, I think we managed to touch on most of the questions that came through in our chat and Q&A function, but if you didn't get the answer you were looking for, please do feel free to email one of us at the ACI. All of our details are on the website and we will try and get you the answer you were looking for. Steve, if you were there, if you'd like to close us out, please come back on camera. Thank you to all of our speakers for giving us the time today, and yeah, fantastic insights, and we really appreciate your expertise.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Roisin, and thank you for sharing the event this afternoon, and thanks to Alex and Sarah and Nick and Andy for joining us this afternoon. I mean, this is the start of a conversation that's going to continue. There's a lot of conditionality around things that people have said today. I think my view from conversations we've had in recent weeks is this is likely to happen, and it's likely to happen. And I think the issues for organizations like ours is how we leverage the opportunity that's coming for us in terms of freeing up this market. In terms of, I think there's already conversations starting with the FSA, which will continue in the coming weeks, about the impact of this on the regulatory process. I think Andy's points about how this impacts in terms of marketing, advertising, are very obvious places where we can engage and open up things. I mean, I have some experience with this, having been involved in rescheduling in 2018 about the sort of the lag factor in terms of getting the hinterland, if you like, of stakeholders to get ready for this. But I do think that, my impression is that the government want to make a bit of a fuss about this when they do it. And I think it's, particularly, and I think they, and as Alex attested from the United States, people get really bogged down in this kind of stuff in jurisdictions all over the world. So if we can get this clarity, it would give us a marked advantage here in the UK. Overall, I think the point was made about TRIP and others, but I think we know these products are ubiquitously available. We know that they're available in every high street in the country. We know that they're sold in every pharmacy, they're sold in every health food store, they're sold in every supermarket. So we know there's consumer demand, but it always felt to me from our consumer survey data, I think we ran a survey 3 or 4 months ago, there's still this very high level of confusion and ambiguity about, are these products safe? Are these products legal? And if we can get to the stage in the next year or so where we can talk about these products as being legal and safe, the sky's the limit for this product as a category. I think Andy's point about MPD is an important one as well, right? Because in all our conversations with the big food and drink innovation consultancies over the last year, it's clear that the potentials are for CBD as an ingredient as well as a product. But there are issues, but not just in relation to the legal framework, but also in terms of the regulatory framework as well. But it feels to me this is a significant moment, and I think we'll be reconvening this conversation between now and Christmas as things proceed, and we'd like to continue to bring you together as a community to consider the options and how the impact on the future of the sector going forward. So once again, wherever you are around the globe, thanks for joining this afternoon. We'll keep this conversation moving and invite you to further interactions. And thanks again to all the ACI members who continue to fund our good work, and we're always grateful. Goodbye and have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Thank you.